I'm sure for some of us, and certainly myself included, to be honest, the majority of the GT award-winning cars in the Gran Turismo series, not just in 7, but even in some of the previous games as well, tend to be cars that you kind of think, oh yeah, that's cool. You get it in the game, you use it for about 5 minutes, you see what it's good for, maybe not so good for, maybe do some tuning to it, and then maybe not actually use it all that much thereafter. And it's one of the inherent downsides of a pre-tuned vehicle. It means that just like in real life, how often a tuned car is not worth as much as a stock one because somebody's already put their own stamp on it. Likewise in the game, you can't really personalise a pre-tuned car to your own liking quite as much as you can with a completely blank slate, both visually and in terms of tuning. You are to some degree bound by what the other builder, be it a private owner or a factory, has already done to the car, which means that in a similar way to Vision GTs, you're often pretty much stuck with what you've got to work with, and even with tuning, you won't see necessarily as much of a radical difference in the car as you would, for example, taking the stock version of that same car and then tuning it up to whatever its limit would be. And a prime example for me is the Camaro from not too long ago. The wide body, kind of racing looking Camaro looked like it could be a really useful car. It has some potential for example, cash grinding at Le Mans, but it's fairly excessive on fuel, and it's one of those cars which, if we had a stock Camaro, you already know that the stock version would end up being used by way more players for way more events and have way more range in its tuning, which is unfortunate because many of these SEMA cars are really cool. This one, I think, manages to skirt the line of being certainly to somebody else's build specifications, since it was built for a private customer, but thankfully, because of how hefty its specs already are, this actually is a very impressive car to use. Now, in terms of its engine, it is using a kind of mid-sized Windsor motor. It's tuned to well over 1,000 horses, in fact 1,200 or a hair under. You can take it even higher with tuning as well. And even the weight is not too bad. It's 1,633 kilos, so about 1.6 metric tons. Again, that's pretty good. It's fairly reasonable, around 100, 150 kilos more than, say, a Lambo, for example, a modern Lamborghini at least. The point level is 660, which is close to some serious race cars, but not ridiculously high. Certainly not for a car with this kind of power. So the question is, of course, with a price tag of 300 grand, like most of the others, your Mach 40s, your Novas, the aforementioned Camaro, what can this one do in practice? Well, as I alluded to in my overarching thoughts for 1.34, and as I saw some comments from yourselves saying as well, this is actually definitely one of the best examples of an award-winning SEMA show car being implemented in Gran Turismo. It is a genuinely good car. It's hard to say how much of that is because of the more recent physics changes in the game and how much is because it would have been good anyway. You can only speculate on that front, but regardless of the reason, it is great to drive. Now, of course, being the base car as a 71 model pony car, muscle car, whatever you want to refer to it as, a Ford Maverick, of course, it's going to have some elements of that size and the aforementioned weight. As good as it is, it's still an amount of weight to be working with, and even with all of its heavy modifications, you do need to brake a little bit earlier, turn in a little bit harder than, for example, a sports car or a supercar would have to. But the straight line performance, and ironically, especially for a car with this kind of power, how forgiving this thing is to drive, makes it honestly a pleasure to work with. It's seriously rapid in a straight line, even with no tuning at all, well beyond 200 miles an hour. In fact, in real life, this thing did, I believe it was 202 miles an hour in a standing mile, I think it was. So it's a properly quick car in real life, in the game even more so. Off the top of my head, I believe I had it up around like 230, 240 miles an hour, something like that stock. So it is very, very quick, especially when you haven't done anything to the transmission. And once again, if you use that on the right circuit, well, straight off the bat, 660 points and being capable of around 230 miles an hour, well, that's pretty damn good. Being sub 700, of course, not with racing tyres, but still sub 700 points. The cash cow potential is undeniable. I personally haven't tried using it for that myself. I would imagine that the higher power, much like the Camaro, could be a bit of an issue in terms of fuel use, but I will definitely say that if you are looking for one of these custom cars, aftermarket tuned cars, SEMA show winners, award winners, this is probably one of the ones to look at first. Now, for some players, I don't necessarily think that this will get more popular or see more use than what, at least from what I've seen, certainly looks to be one of the most popular, if not the most popular, SEMA show cars to be featured in the series, and that is the Mach 40 Mustang. It's a fantastic car because it's so versatile, because it is more of a supercar, and that's the whole point. It's a Mustang meets a GT. This one might not be quite as popular as that, but I think it could well end up being up there because it is so good to work with, so quick. And certainly, if it's that good already, well, imagine what some upgrades in terms of longer gearing, perhaps, certainly upgraded tyres and brakes, you could make it even better than it already is. Overall, I think it's actually a fairly simple review, and at the risk of it being boring, that's just how it goes sometimes. Sometimes you have a car where there's no real drama, it's just a good car, and I'm actually really happy to be able to say that about this one, because usually, to be honest, when I talk about these award-winning cars, these show cars, these custom cars in the game, the majority of them, besides looking really cool, as I alluded to at the start of the video, they don't tend to be cars that really blow my mind that much, and they certainly don't tend to be cars that I use all that often. It really does have to be something special, or at least very different. Like, for example, I believe it's the Wicked Fabrications GT51 Ford, because it's so unique, and it has that old shoebox custom, kind of vibe, which I personally love, regardless of how quick it is. But many of the other ones kind of fall into a similar pattern of take a muscle car, put big rims on it, give it loads of power. And they tend to follow that formula over and over again. This one is definitely one of the best examples of doing that in the game though, so if you haven't already bought it, at 300 grand it is not that much to spend, and even if you don't tune it immediately, even if you don't tune it until much later on, it's worthwhile having it in your garage, I would say, because for that kind of price range, you can genuinely take on supercars with this thing, even hypercars, and potentially earn back its own money very easily, and then put money into tuning it and turn it into maybe even more of a beast, certainly for straight line performance, and to a surprising degree, even cornering as well. Don't expect it to take corners like a Lotus, of course, but for what it is, for its size, for its platform, certainly for its age, well, I mean, the age of the original shell, at least, given how much of it is changed and upgraded compared to back then, it's a very impressive car. So that's it for my thoughts on the Maverick. Of course, I'd love to hear yours down below. Are you a huge fan of the car? Do you maybe not like the car? Are you kind of over these SEMA cars? I could see some people kind of viewing them a bit like Vision GTs, as being one of those that they're just not that interested in. Either way, let me know. And of course, stick around tomorrow, wherein I will be reviewing the last of the three in 1.34, of course, the Nismo R32 Skyline. But that's it for this review. Of course, I'll see you next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.